Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Iwane with the Samuel Lawrence Foundation. I'm so excited to introduce our guest speaker, Shaun Burnie, today. Shaun Burnie, currently based in Hamburg, Germany, has been an independent nuclear consultant for the past 7 years, specializing in nuclear policy in East Asia, nuclear fuel cycle issues, and nuclear power plant safety. He has worked in Japan for over 20 years. He was formerly nuclear coordinator at Greenpeace International, including leading investigations into the Fukushima Daiichi plant during the early 1990s until the early 2000s. He holds a master's degree from King's College, University in London, in strategic studies. In May of 2014, he joined Greenpeace Germany as a nuclear specialist in their energy unit. SLF has been very fortunate, and myself personally, to work closely with Shaun in 2013 when SLF sponsored a Fukushima Daiichi disaster seminar entitled Lessons for California in San Diego featuring former Prime Minister Naoto Kan. He also played a very pivotal role in informing our coalition and the public about the steam generator issues, so we are indebted to him. Please, during today's Zoom, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and staff and I will work to get those asked directly to Shaun. Without further ado, I give the mic to Shaun.
Who's muted?
It looks like you're muted, Shaun.
Muted.
I will start again. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hope you can all hear me. I'm looking at all these faces, and some are recognizable, familiar. We're all looking a little bit older, but not too bad. I know I've only got about 30 minutes, so I would like to do a quick 10-minute presentation as discussed, and then maybe take question and answers. So first off, I'd like to just start with a short video clip, just to give you a sort of sense as to the sort of general thing we're talking about. So I'll do share screen, and then I'll go through presentation, and then I'll just finish with a short little video clip from some of our work. So, okay. Yeah, so I work, as Kathy said, mostly in Japan, also more latterly in Korea. And we have been working on the water issue since at least 2012, particularly the last 4 or 5 years. And we issued our first report on this issue back in January 2019. And it was a number of the issues that had arisen during the whole process where the Japanese government was evaluating its options that struck us as requiring investigations. When we started working on this in a more technical way in 2018, one of my colleagues, the late John Large, who some of you will remember from San Onofre, we got access to some TEPCO data. And what was remarkable from that data was that, according to them, everything was working fine with the processing of the contaminated water. But the data just looked so consistent that in water chemistry, it's just not feasible. So we released our first report in January 2019, and we've been working on the issue intensely in Japan, but also in East Asia since then. And we've just released our latest report. I'd just like to show you a little bit of where we're talking. This is footage from October 2019. Hope you can all see that. And this is aerial shots from Futaba, which is to the north of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. And as you'll see in the sort of center and background, that's the water tanks. So there's about 1,000 of these water tanks. As of last month, about 1.23 million cubic meters, or 1.23 million tons. And that water has been accumulating since 2011. If you look at our January report of 2019, it actually goes way back to the 1960s, where TEPCO decided to reduce costs by lowering the level of the reactor site to within 10 meters of the Pacific, as opposed to 30 meters above. And ever since then, groundwater has been entering the site. Of course, before 2011, although there'd be some contamination, it wasn't obviously 3 melted reactor cores. So since 2011, they've been struggling for how to process that water. If I can move this bit here. You'll see, and we'll come back to the issue of where they could be storing the water, but basically to the south and to the north of Fukushima Daiichi, you have 2 municipalities, Futaba and Okuma. And basically, it's in the nuclear exclusion zone. There are limited access to some areas, but generally they are uninhabited. So we'll come back to that, but it's important to see sort of physically where the Fukushima Daiichi site is and the sort of space that's available. So just to quickly go through some of the issues, our latest findings that you will not be surprised to hear is that the contaminated groundwater continues to accumulate, despite TEPCO saying many years ago that they would solve the problem by 2020. That's not happening. The average accumulation each day in 2019 was about 180 cubic meters, 180 tons of groundwater that was becoming contaminated. And of course, that water is then pumped and stored in tanks, as well as the water that's circulated for cooling the molten fuel. You'll hear about the ALPS system. It's an ion exchange water, it's a giant water chemistry kit, which according to TEPCO in the sort of years immediately after 2011, was going to solve the problem about removing the radioactivity from the water. The technology is flawed. In 2011, they actually ran a test facility. US company Purolite got the contract with Hitachi. It's all detailed in our report. Purolite are a US-based water chemistry company with contracts all over the world, but their technology seemed to work, and it was verified by those in Japan. But they were basically blocked from using their technology. They lost out to Toshiba, and the ALPS technology that was then used over the next years pretty much didn't perform as TEPCO were claiming. And that's one of the reasons why we still have this huge problem. About 72%, over 800,000 tons of the water in the tanks at the moment has to undergo so-called secondary processing. It's a question about whether that will be effective or not. At the same time, the Japanese government has communicated that the only hazard, or they admit it's hazard, the only radionuclide that's in the water that will be discharged will be tritium. Now, tritium is not a harmless radionuclide, but it's certainly not the most hazardous in the world. But the reality is that a whole cocktail of radionuclides will be discharged. So carbon-14, strontium-90, iodine-129, cobalt-60, all of which the Japanese government do not want to discuss. They even describe this water as ALPS processed water, not contaminated. And it's a sort of language thing. It's a big challenge because it's continually reported that it's only going to be tritium water that will be discharged, which is bad enough, but actually it's a much bigger problem. I'm just conscious of the time here. One thing that it's really important to understand about the strontium-90, just focusing on one radionuclide. So if the discharge decision goes ahead and 2 years from now, or a bit longer, they start discharging, there's no real confirmed amount as to how much they're going to be discharging per annum. Those figures are not really worked out yet. But if we take the average concentration, which is about 1 becquerel per liter of strontium-90, that's really at the lower end. The strontium-90 levels are such that the amount that would be discharged per annum would be about the equivalent of about 1,700 years of what's discharged from your average 1 gigawatt nuclear reactor. If, as is more likely, they are discharging more per annum, it's as much as 50,000 years of strontium-90 that's discharged, authorized by regulators worldwide from a nuclear reactor about 1,000 megawatts. So it's an enormous inventory. At the same time, and this is really important to understand, while the contaminated water clearly is a problem, it's dwarfed by the actual overall radioactive inventory of the molten fuel, which according to the government in Japan and their mid and long-term roadmap, they're going to remove all of it within 10 years between 2021 and 2031. And you'll see that constantly being reported. It's complete fantasy. There's no technical basis for that. And the amount of radioactivity in those molten fuel cores is staggering. And just taking the strontium-90 content, there's about 520 petabecquerels of strontium-90 in the 3 reactor cores that melted down in 2011. About 1 to 3% of that was discharged, which means the vast majority of it remains. It's about 14 million curies of strontium-90 sitting underneath the reactor buildings at Fukushima Daiichi. And of course, the projection is that so long as they don't solve that problem, so long as they don't solve the groundwater problem, over the next 10 years, in addition to the 1.23 million tons that exist at the moment, the range is between 500,000 and an additional 1 million tons of contaminated water will accumulate. So this is not something that they're solving anytime soon, including any decision to discharge, because this is a never-ending crisis. So it's important to understand that when you see media reports, perhaps in the coming weeks, perhaps in the coming months, that a decision's been taken, it doesn't mean that the situation, of course, is solved. There seems to be some problem with my formatting here. Just to emphasize one of the things here, in 2018 and 19, one of the committees that was reviewing this issue for the government, there were some good members of that subcommittee, and they challenged TEPCO on the storage capacity at the site. And this you'll see also constantly reported, that storage space will run out in 2022, and therefore a decision needs to be made. In reality, and TEPCO were forced to admit this, there is storage capacity on the site, and there's storage capacity outside the site. The subcommittee admitted as much in its February 2020 report, and that's effectively what we should be pushing for, to expose this myth that they have to discharge because they're running out of storage space. It's not easy, it will take time, but when you think about the length of time that we're going to be dealing with Fukushima Daiichi, when you look at the radiological hazards, which are measured in not tens of years, not even hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years, they've certainly got time to deal with this because they're going to be dealing with this forever. So let's look at the realistic, least environmentally damaging option. There's still a risk, but that's why we're advocating long-term storage and processing. And I'll just come back to a little bit. I know I'm running out of time here. It's 1:45. So this was an underwater survey that we did in 2016, Japanese research vessel and the Rainbow Warrior. I'll quickly scan through this, but
right now it's only showing the PDF. I think you'll have to share screen for your screen.
Okay, I'll let's see if I can do that. maybe we can't do that. Stop share. Okay. Share screen. God, too many video screens open. Okay. You can see that? So I'll just put the volume down. So we did a survey which is not recommended in the winter of 2016 off the coast of Fukushima. We covered about 100, 150 kilometers of coastline, but we also surveyed next to the plant about 1 to 2 kilometers. The positive thing, if you can say it, is that it's the Pacific Ocean. It's vast, as you know. And so you have massive dispersal of radioactivity with very rapid dispersal through the ocean currents. But of course, that doesn't mean that the radioactivity is not having an impact. What we did in our survey work there is we were looking for contamination on the seabed. We found very little in the actual ocean seabed. And what you found was that the concentrations were in the river estuaries and in the fine mud. When and if the Japanese government goes ahead with discharging, obviously different radionuclides behave differently in the environment. There'll be rapid dispersal, but there'll also be concentrations in marine life, including fisheries, seaweed, which is one of the reasons why the Japanese fisheries associations, as well as wider society, is so strongly opposed to the discharge. The main concern we have is for the local population of Fukushima, but at the same time, we know this is an issue for people in Korea. The Chinese government has been intervening over the last year or so. So it's not just a domestic or even a local issue, it's an international issue, which is why we're working on different levels at the UN to put pressure on the Japanese government. I switch, as all of you do, working on these issues between severe pessimism and severe optimism. And at this stage, it's possible that we're going to get a delay and that they're going to go for additional storage for a shorter period, a longer period of time. So maybe a few more years, while they negotiate with the fisheries to see whether they can come up with some sort of compensation package. I think there's still various options we have politically and legally, domestically and internationally, to basically stop this discharge. And that's over the next months and over the next few years, that's effectively what we'll be doing. I'm conscious of the time, so I think I'll stop there. I've sort of skirted through a lot of these issues and be happy to take question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaun. That was great. I have a question, and finally I have another question, but we'll start with a two-part question from me. And all of you on this Zoom, please enter your questions in the chat, because we have a world-class expert here to answer what he can. My question, Shaun, to you is, and it really relates to the releases, the liquid batch releases at San Onofre as well. I guess the first question I have is, I saw in your paper in bold print, it said storage is a viable option. And so I'm wondering, first of all, why, I mean, I know Japan and they're worried about space. Aside from that issue, why the heck are they releasing this if storage is indeed viable? That's the first part. Second part is, this is a layman's non-scientific viewpoint, but is it true that evaporating this water by pure evaporation, would it be possible to even start evaporating the water, and therefore you have more concentrated isotopes and therefore keep those in storage?
So two really good questions. First question, this is a political driven decision making. It's not based upon the actual reality of the situation in Fukushima Daiichi. or in Fukushima Prefecture. So it's a Japanese government decision based upon, to put it bluntly, its obsession with getting over the 2011 meltdown and communicating to the people of Japan, and it's particularly the people of Japan, that you can recover from a triple reactor meltdown, because its energy policy is still based upon operating up to 30 to 35 nuclear reactors. The 2030 target is about 22% of Japan's electricity is supposed to come from nuclear. There's 9 reactors that have restarted. Actually, there's only 1 operating at the moment, and it's about 7% of the country's domestic electricity. So Fukushima is a massive impediment, as they see it, to changing Japanese public opinion, particularly at a local level. So getting rid of the water, as they see it, by dumping it in the Pacific, is seen as part of that commitment to basically decommission the whole site within 30 to 40 years. There's other factors, including an agreement with Fukushima Prefecture that everything at Fukushima Daiichi that's contaminated will be removed from Fukushima Prefecture by mid-century, which of course is not going to happen. But discharging 1 million tons of water into the Pacific will be seen as, well, solving that problem. Of course it doesn't. Second answer, which I'm actually forgetting what the question was. Oh yeah, evaporation. So some of you, I know there's probably folk on here that worked on 3 Mile Island maybe back in '79. Evaporation was the solution, as they saw it, to dealing with the contaminated water at 3 Mile Island. It was included in the Fukushima review as to an option. Actually, it was one of the 2 options recommended by the subcommittee. It was never really the serious option, in part because the volume of water. The modeling shows that you can evaporate a lot of the radionuclides and concentrate some of the heavier isotopes, but the tritium effectively goes into the lower atmosphere. So the dose to the local population would be really serious. So evaporation is not a solution. It probably had some consequences at 3 Mile Island. It took them 10 years to evaporate. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how much water there was. I think it was in the range of like 200,000 tons. And here we're talking, maybe not as much as that, 20,000 tons actually. So yeah, it's not a solution at all.
Thank you. This question comes from our co-founder, Bart. Can you talk about the parallels between the disastrous cleanup at Fukushima and Edison/Holtec International's poor management of decommissioning at San Onofre?
Wow, okay. I did a bit of checking on, I've not worked on San Onofre, as you all know, for quite a number of years. I know you guys are all actively engaged in dealing with the legacy of Edison and the NRC. I think clearly you have a spent fuel crisis at San Onofre. Parallels are in some extent similar to what we have at Fukushima, at least in terms of there's nowhere for it to go. Obviously, the issue of what to do with the spent fuel at San Onofre, the type of containers, Holtec, etc., that's an ongoing crisis, an ongoing threat. In terms of radioactive inventory, enormous, of course, comparable to Fukushima, even though there's more reactors at Fukushima. Higher burn-up at San Onofre than was permitted by the Japanese regulators at Fukushima, so you have a higher burn-up fuel in the spent fuel. The general situation in Japan is that there is no off-site solution for spent fuel or other nuclear waste. The movement generally opposes dry cask storage so long as the reactors are operating. There's proposals for interim storage sites off-site, away from the reactors. That's also strongly opposed. That's in the Kansai region in particular, from Kansai Electric. And it's in parallel to what's happened in other parts of the world, particularly Europe, Germany, where I've worked a lot over the years. You enter into a dialogue on where to and how to manage spent fuel when you've got a clear commitment or the actual reactor is shut down. And I'm afraid there isn't any solution that doesn't have risks. Clearly, having spent fuel near the shore in Southern California is not acceptable. But at least from our position at Greenpeace, neither is it acceptable to move that spent fuel hundreds of kilometers to an interim storage site somewhere else in the United States, whether it's Native American land or anywhere else. You have to deal with it as a local, which could be inland, but it's a local problem. You have to deal with it, and the authorities have to deal with it, and you keep the pressure up. But there is really no acceptable solution to this that doesn't carry risks.
Thank you. We are now about 4 minutes before our scheduled completion time, and I just wanted to have everyone be cognizant of that fact. Some more questions are coming in, and it's totally up to Shaun. Shaun, would you be interested in giving us 10 more minutes of your time?
Of course, yes. I talk too much, so yeah, happy to.
Yeah, same with us. So at that point, we will do our best to forward the remaining questions to Shaun for possible answering of those questions later. We have another question from staff, from our Associate Director, Chelsea. At San Onofre, we are dealing with regular radioactive water discharged. A whistleblower came forward recently to share that the plant's materials are being cut up in water tanks, and the contaminated water from that decommissioning is being released into the ocean. What are the tactics people at San Onofre can adapt from the studies and advocacy you are working on at Fukushima? And what kind of additional storage are you proposing at Fukushima?
So, I mean, I'm cognizant of the amount of work that everyone's doing in Southern California on San Onofre, and whistleblowers have a long tradition going back decades, obviously, in terms of disclosing what Edison has done over the years. I think it's absolutely critical that you have access to data, that you check your facts as much as possible. I know, some of the work that's been done over the years is cutting edge in terms of analysis of, for example, the whole problem with spent fuel storage and the whole tech casts, the work that Donna's done, Donna Gilmore, over the years. So it's constantly updating yourself, informing yourself. If you can get access to independent experts, that's really critical. Credibility is, even though the industry continually lies, we can't and should not exaggerate, but we need to have the facts as much as possible. Transparency, of course, is a hugely important issue. It's a major challenge in Japan in terms of disclosure of information. But yeah, if I'm happy to answer more detailed on that if you want to email me. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The second part was, what kind of additional storage would you be proposing at Fukushima?
Right. So one of the reason why there is additional storage space on the site, which is not being utilized at this stage, is that the overall mid and long-term decommissioning plan states that over the next 10 years to 2031, all of the molten fuel will be removed and put into storage. So there's between 600 and 1,100 tons of molten fuel, most of which they don't know where it is, what condition it's in. So it's not going to be removed within the next 10 years, and it's not therefore going to be stored in above ground storage facilities. So basically what we're saying is get real, throw out the current roadmap, start again, and basically give an honest assessment as to how long this is going to take and whether in fact you're going to be able to remove that molten fuel. In the meantime, build additional storage capacity, robust tanks, and at the same time apply best available technology, not the ALPS technology that's been used, but superior ALPS technology, to try and get the concentrations down to a minimum, maybe even below detectable limit, in the water. So you'd be left largely with tritium and carbon-14, probably technetium-99. That doesn't mean that you're given approval to discharge it at that point. It just means that you're minimizing the radiological inventory of each tank, so that if, for example, there was a major earthquake and the tank ruptured, you'd be minimizing the radiological release. Of course, all of the processed waste, the concentration of strontium-90, etc., all of those radionuclides, that's still there and is still waste, obviously, for tens, hundreds, thousands of years. And all of that will have to be managed on the site.
Thank you. Thank you. This is another question from staff, from our program director, Amanda. I've been reading among activists that TEPCO and the government keep releasing concentration, i.e. dilution figures, and never the total volume of radionuclides. How might this relate to, if it does, your observation on dispersal versus concentration?
If I understand the question right, you're talking about ongoing releases or future releases if they approve discharge?
Future releases.
Future releases.
We have ongoing releases in San Onofre, and so we are trying to relate that. I think that's the point of the question.
So fortunately, there are some really good scientists. I saw Tim Musso on the screen at one point. There's some really good scientists that have given really excellent analysis on the different concentration factors for different radionuclides, and look at how those radionuclides behave in the environment. I'm not too aware of the discharge figures for San Onofre. Clearly, if they're going through decommissioning, there's going to be discharges. That's sort of inevitable. But in terms of the types of radionuclides, obviously behaving differently. So some more likely to concentrate in seaweed, for example, some in the bottom feeding demersal fish. Seaweed is your main problem in terms of concentration in the short term. And I would be looking at technetium-99 discharges from San Onofre. It's a very high concentration factor in kelp, for example. But yeah, there's a lot to learn and continually investigate on these issues, clearly.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you elaborate on the impact of heat output compared to radionuclides? Has anyone assessed the impact over time of the near area heating of the Pacific and other waters?
So obviously, when these reactors were operating, and there were 6 on the Fukushima Daiichi site and 4 to the south at Fukushima Daiichi, of course they were using cooling water, the Pacific, to cool the reactors and discharging that heated water. Actually, the work that was done in California, particularly on Diablo Canyon, linked into the state water board, where they were effectively pushing them to build cooling towers. There's so much information. I think it's Pisces Consulting have done excellent work on the effect of cooling water and entrapment in terms of fish species. Some of the best in the world analysis from them in San Diego. It actually has not been more recently an issue in Japan, although it should be. There's been some activists that have worked on this issue in terms of measuring ocean temperature, for example, up in Tomari nuclear power plant in Hokkaido. Of course, since 2013, all the reactors were shut down for nearly 2 years in Japan, and the majority have not restarted. So in terms of localized effects, there's anecdotal evidence from fishing communities about how it has changed the underwater ecology. So fish species that had disappeared for decades have returned. Plant life has changed. That's particularly true in the sort of warmer waters in the south, but in Kyushu, but also up in Hokkaido and Tomari. But it's, you know, there's so many issues that could be worked on, and that's obviously one of them that has been historically important. It's been one of the factors that led to the agreement to shut down Diablo.
Thank you. We have another one. Are there any institutions seriously studying safe ways to decommission reactors? If yes, would you have any idea who is funding these institutions? Fabulous question.
Okay, so I spent a lot of my life working with my colleagues in Germany, and I guess one of the few positives out of Fukushima was the Merkel government committed to a phase out, which we're now 2 years away from the last reactor to be shut down. So decommissioning in Germany is done, well, in terms of public participation, it's probably one of the more open and democratic. Still problems, of course, still strong industry that don't want to be transparent. But at the state level in Germany, you have a lot of access, a lot of political leverage. A couple of the institutes in Germany, the OKO Institute, which has been working with the German government over many years, has done a lot of work on decommissioning. Still problems, but in terms of critical analysis on how to decommission, how to involve stakeholders, I would say that was a good starting point as to how to look at these issues.
Fantastic. What is the best available water chemistry kits above ALPS? We aren't listing names.
Okay. What is the best? Well, at least in terms of the data that I've seen, the ALPS technology that was deployed in a test facility by Purolite in conjunction with Hitachi in 2011, it ran for about 3 or 4 months. That reduced, at least in terms of the data that I've seen, it reduced strontium-90 levels and other radionuclides to below detection limit. Actually, it's something, again, worth emphasizing. At that time, they ran small batches of water, so obviously it's easier. But they ran small batches, and the target set by TEPCO was non-detectable. Not the regulatory limit, but non-detectable levels. And according to the data I've seen, they reached that. When they were kicked off, Purolite, Toshiba contracted with various other companies, including Avantac from the US, and the goalposts were shifted. So they moved from non-detectable to regulatory limit. So the regulatory limit, of course, like US regulations and regulators everywhere, they're not designed to protect the environment, they're designed to allow the industry to operate. And so there's a higher limit set. And so that means, for example, with strontium-90, the regulatory limit is 30 becquerels per liter, which doesn't sound very much, but then you multiply that by 1.23 million cubic meters, and you get a lot of strontium-90. So the non-detectable level that was achieved in 2011 indicates, at least to me, that technology was superior and operated with experience, as opposed to what Toshiba and Hitachi did, particularly in the period 2013 to 2015.
Okay. Can you briefly explain to us about the Kobe, which is in Kansai area, Kobe steel scandal in 2017 and its impact on the nuclear industry here in the US?
Okay, that's at least several days.
I know.
I would recommend you do a search for John Large on the Kobe steel, but also on the Le Creusot steel, carbonized steel problem in France. The two are absolutely directly connected. I know more about macro segregation of carbon steel than is probably healthy. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a material scientist, but we had access to some of the best in the world, and they never solved the problem in Japan. They just moved on, basically. But you know, like reactor pressure vessels in France, they never solved the problem. The regulator was effectively bulldozed out of the way by EDF, the utility. So reactor pressure vessels, steam generators, they still have the same problem. It's just that everyone's moved on and the regulator just doesn't want to deal with it. And of course, in terms of the potential catastrophic severe accident scenarios, a number of you will know about reactor pressure vessel rupture. That would make Fukushima look like a picnic. And that's what we're facing so long as we continue to operate these reactors. There's obviously a Kobe Steel and Le Creusot connection to the US, to the reactors operating in the US. So yeah, it's sort of nightmare scenario stuff. It was to me, it was some of the most important work that I'd been involved in over many decades. And unfortunately we lost.
Thanks. I think we'll have to reassess, but this is going to be the last question for now. I saw a Canadian museum exhibit this is not my question, it comes from the gallery. I saw a Canadian museum exhibit that the coast at Fukushima has been decimated. Are they still receiving waterborne radiation?
Okay, decimated in the sense of they were impacted by the earthquake and the tsunami. In terms of radioactive contamination, the highest concentrations are actually in the river mouth estuaries. The simple reason for that is that the mountains and forests of Fukushima were at least as much a source of contamination than the plant itself in the months and years after the accident began. And of course, the typhoon season every year leads to a spike in radionuclide dispersal coming down through the ecosystem, the water cycle, and into the estuaries and in the fine mud. Whereas the discharges into the Pacific, there is evidence of some localized concentrations on the seabed, but largely it looks as if the discharges were, and this includes the contamination from the original fallout, was rapidly dispersed, but also concentrated, but not so much on the seabed. And the fisheries communities are still, of course, struggling with the reputational damage, as they call it. There's a very good testing program that's still in place that has to remain in place and not basically be pulled back, as some in Japan have been pushing for, to give sort of confidence to consumers about how safe, or at least what concentrations are in their food. There's a very important radiation laboratory in Iwaki run by the mothers. They set up perhaps one of the best science labs in Japan. They even measure for strontium-90, and that's a public service for basically normal citizens to collect radioactivity, have their food measured, water measured, fish measured, to sort of give confidence to the local people who have to live there.
Fantastic. How is everyone on this call? We were supposed to end at noon. Can we go with one or two more questions? How are you? We're already 4 minutes past the original time that we said. We gave extra 10 minutes. Shaun, how are you doing with your time?
I'm enjoying seeing sunshine. So we don't have so much of that here at the moment, although I actually was swimming in the sea today at 10 degrees. So,
oh my goodness. Chilly, chilly.
I'm happy to have a few more questions if people are okay with that.
Well, we really appreciate your time. And for all those wondering, this will be recorded, and we will be able to share the recording of this Zoom when it is processed. Thank you. Okay, so who sets the annual safe dose is it millirems or rems at 6? This is what we are looking at San Onofre. Is this standard accepted internationally?
Oh, okay. So, so if I talk about Japan, which is, I guess, the most relevant here, the Japanese government is sort of, they have this sort of, what's it called, the hormesis theory, that actually radiation may well be good for you. So although they used to apply the 1 millisievert recommended maximum, and it's important to mention maximum there, public dose, that was revised in the immediate aftermath of the start of the accident in 2011. So that was raised to permit about 20 millisieverts per annum for children, mothers, etc. And that's for the areas around Fukushima Daiichi in particular. The problem is the Japanese government has set standards saying that actually 100 millisieverts is no risk. There's no evidence that that sort of low dose radiation exposure has any noticeable health effects. And if you see some of the literature that's made available in Fukushima, particularly in public information centers, they have images of pregnant women receiving 100 millisieverts per annum and saying it's perfectly safe. Utterly outrageous. But that's the sort of approach that the Japanese government has to radiation protection. Each country generally accepts the 1 millisievert level. And for workers, including women workers, there's different maximum recommended. In the US, it's actually superior to Japan, but still problematic.
Thank you. And I think this will be the last question for today. Any suggestions for messaging something as scary as repackaging from canisters into thick casks here at San Onofre? It was challenging enough to stop them from restarting a defective reactor in 2012. Edison has the easy messaging. They just want to tell people that they want to hear what they want to hear about getting the waste out as soon as possible.
So messaging on repackaging.
Yes.
From that, you're meaning in terms of they need to remove from the defective Holtec containers and use the
thick
whatever
wall.
thick wall caster types. I think animated graphics are pretty good in terms of conveying the complexity of something that most people are not interested in. I don't know, in terms of accident scenarios, how you could do an accident scenario on what a thin-walled cask potentially would do. Maybe that's already been done. The spent fuel problem has been a significant driver for public pressure globally. In particular, the work that's been done in Korea, for example, on spent fuel pools. Obviously, you've got a different situation with dry cask, but I think the evidence that you've got in terms of the vulnerability of the Holtec casks, you've got the science there. I think some imaginative, creative people that you have in Southern California should be able to get that across.
Fantastic. Well, I don't want, this could go on for hours and hours. We have so many questions. And I really, on behalf of Samuel Lawrence and on behalf of our coalition, we want to applaud you for taking your time and being so generous.
Thank you. It's very nice to be seeing you all again.
So great to see your face. Oh my God. It's been
you remember, I was always one to complain about the weather in Southern California. And of course, you now have extreme situation in California. So my sympathies to you over there. We don't have that problem here in Southwest Scotland, fortunately, but we are also impacted by climate change. But yeah, so I wish you all the best in your battles ahead, and glad to see that there's still so many of us still working on these issues.
Thanks, Shaun.
Thank you.
Let's do this
Thank
again.
you.
Harry, Laura, Bart.
Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you so much.